Thank you very much, Chris. That's really very big dose of information for people. Please welcome David Shoebridge now, and we'll see what the next phase of this is.
Well, thanks very much for the invitation to come and speak tonight. First time I've been to this venue, it's very Cuban. It's got a kind of nice feel, but I'd like to acknowledge the venue we're on today. Like the institution I'm a part of, the New South Wales Parliament, is on Gadigal land, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. We have a very real obligation, this generation, not next generation, but this generation, to deliver genuine justice to First Nations peoples, and we are not doing it, and I think we should collectively commit to that each time we come together, particularly in a progressive political space. So the question that was posed to me for tonight was about a Green New Deal. And what is a Green New Deal? Is it just kind of a slogan and a tweet? Is it a Facebook post and a nice little meme? Or is it actually some very clear content that should be informing a Green New Deal? So I'm pretty firmly of the belief that we need to start articulating the very real goals from a Green New Deal. We need to rapidly move beyond slogans and feel-good statements and get to the point where we're actually discussing what the content of a Green New Deal should be. Well, can I just start just some basic principles about what a Green New Deal should involve? Obviously, we need significant degree of transformative change. But we need transformative change that isn't going to maroon particularly those coal community workers, those fossil fuel workers who, as Chris has shown, have significant high-wage jobs at the moment. And for many parts of particularly rural and regional New South Wales and Australia, the wealth that's produced out of the fossil fuel industry is what keeps their entire regional economy afloat. And when you're talking to particularly workers in an industry that's facing transition, and you say to them, get on board with a just transition. You know, we will look after you, the transition will be great. Get on board with us, because do it for the planet, you know, do it for the local air quality, get on board. They look at you and they look at the history of every industry. They look at every industry that's gone through a transition, whether it's the textile industry in Australia, or it's the manufacturing industry, including the car industry, and they look at every single industry that's gone through transition, and they've heard these words from politicians, or sometimes even from union officials, that, you know, there'll be a package to look after you, there'll be a redundancy scheme, we'll have a training scheme. They hear these words, but not once in our history has it ever really played out to be true. And not once has there really been a community that, or a series of workers, as a result of a transition, who have even come close to keeping parity economically. And people aren't mugs. And so when you go out into a coal community and say, get on board with a just transition, and they say to you, with the figures that Chris has, because it's what they know, well, look, I'm on 150 grand a year and I'm a machinery operator with Cert 4 or Cert 3 qualifications. Where am I going to find a job anything like this other than in the coal industry? We need to have an answer to that. Like, not just, oh, well, you know, there'll be magical jobs in the renewable energy sector, or, you know, you can become a PV, a photovoltaic installer and have your own ABN and do it on a sort of casual thing. We actually need to be talking to those communities with far more concrete plans which come up with money. I'm firmly of the view that one of the ways we do that is we insist upon public ownership and control of the energy sector as we move through this transition. Public ownership, public control of the energy sector brings with it a guarantee of quality, high income, dependable jobs in communities There's a variety of other benefits, and I'll talk to some of those as this presentation proceeds, but that's one of the key reasons we should be talking about 100% publicly owned renewable energy as we transition. And I firmly believe we need to start building those alliances now in order to make this work. Building alliances with unions, with environmentalists, with local councils, and with those coal communities who at the moment are feeling like nobody's looking out for their future. They don't believe that the Labor Party has an answer for them, because I think they see Labor vacillating between committing to a kind of transition and then trying to pretend that coal will continue forever. And I think Labor got judged very harshly in the federal election because they weren't committing to one thing or the other. But I think that for the moment, many of them are willing to trust the coalition because the coalition is making a variety of very simple noises and political messages, which is, we support coal. Now, just saying we support coal without acknowledging that we're going to have to keep the coal in the ground, to keep the climate safe, and at some point that's going to become a political reality as well as just a scientific reality. And just simply saying that when we know that a lot of the external export markets at some point, whether it's Korea or Japan or China, are going to start saying, no, actually we don't want your coal anymore because we are going to transition, we're shutting down our coal future. So just those simple words from the coalition for the moment seem to be persuading a significant part of coal communities that the coalition's in their corner. But if they don't have a plan for the transition, I don't believe they're even close to in their corner. It's a political message without any content behind it. And I'll be quite frank, I think it's hard for the Greens at the moment to cut through and get the kind of messages we need into those coal communities, because what they see with the Greens is a threat to their jobs without an answer. And I think they see that broadly in progressive politics, a threat to their job without an answer. So our job is to come up with an answer. So I've said before, our goal should be 100% publicly owned renewable energy. And there's a variety of reasons for doing that. Are we any closer to getting this?
There's something happening.
Okay, cool.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. One of the reasons we should get, well, yeah, in some ways it's back to the future, although this time it'll be renewable energy rather than coal generating assets. One of the reasons we would get that we should be collectively supporting a return to 100% publicly owned generation, transmission and retail, because there's the three levels, is because at the moment, because of a fetish with market-based competition, at the moment there are now three levels of corporate players between us as consumers and retailers, also known as people, and the electrons that are being produced. So this flow of electrons is being produced somewhere. Some of it's from wind power generation, some of it's from hydro, a bunch of it in New South Wales is from coal. They're all being produced, and they're all being produced by different corporate players. Hey, thank you. So there are three ways at the moment the corporates gouge profits out of us. They gouge it at the generation stage, where all those different corporate-owned generators all gouge a profit. And sometimes they game it for profit in a particularly obscene kind of way. We've seen that recently in South Australia, but we see it at, even in terms of the timetables, as Chris was was telling you, the timetables with which we're transitioning or closing down existing generation capacity. Like the discussion around Liddell, for example, is a bizarre discussion. Liddell, if it doesn't get shut down in 7 years, will probably fall over before then, because it's like held together with fencing wire and packing tape. And it's actually slated, it's got a notional production capacity of about 2,200 megawatts.
Yep.
Yeah, about 2,200 megawatts. But it almost never has more than one generator working, one out of the series of generators there. And the regulator itself just sort of notionally puts it in the market as producing at most 750 megawatts, because it is so old and so unreliable, the most unreliable source of power in New South Wales, that it is going to probably fall over before the 7 years plays out. But the reason they're keeping it ticking along is because they know as soon as they take it out of the market, all their competitors are going to have a surge of short-term profits. And they want to have a way of kind of sharing in that short-term profits. Because as one generator comes out in a chaotic kind of market, not in a planned market, as one generator comes out, it means that a particular series of points throughout the year, the spot price for electricity that gets paid by the other generators in the market can just go through the roof. And they want to have a part of that sort of mega profits that are made. That unplanned corporate-based generation is causing us major problems. Also on the transmission, there's another layer of corporate players who gouge out profits at a transmission level because they're largely, not entirely, but largely privately owned across New South Wales. And then the third time is retail. There's also a whole series of separate corporate players that then sell us the power. So we are paying for 3 levels of profit, corporate profit, for every little electron that comes through and keeps our fridge operating. There have been a series of assessments done by both the ACCC and by ACOS, and they suggest that if we actually just took over the retail part of it, if we had a process of setting a fair price for retail, that we could gouge out a substantial amount of that profit. We would greatly reduce electricity prices, and the estimates, ACOS estimate that fairly setting just the retail price would save about $378 a year. The ACCC talk about $200 a year that's going in unsustainable and unreasonable profits in the retail sector. Just in the retail sector, just in 1/3 of that corporate delivery. So if we, even if we just had a publicly owned retailer again, we would be saving people, the best estimates is around about $200 or so, the average household about $200 a year in electricity. I personally believe it's time we reintegrated all 3 levels, generation, transmission and retailer. We created a new public entity called Power New South Wales and we brought it all into public hands. But we also need to be talking about the sort of broader transition. So yes, we should be getting energy into public hands, but we also do, if we want to save the planet, if we seriously want to, address the urgent crisis that is the challenge of climate change, we need to commit to no new coal, no new oil and no new gas projects. We just need to commit to that now. But there's different elements to that. It means no new coal mines, oil or gas exploration or extraction licences, no expansion of the existing fossil fuel operations, and we also need to deal with the export situation as well. It's Green's policy to make it an offence to export thermal coal after 2030, because it's an environmental crime, and we should be actually slating it as an environmental crime. There's a reason we make a distinction between thermal and metallurgical coal. It's because we actually do probably need to continue producing metallurgical coal for a significant period of time because there's no viable alternative way of making new steel. But the bulk of the coal that's sold, that's dug up and exported out of New South Wales is thermal coal, and that's the policy framework we need to get to. But when you say that, and you go to Muswellbrook and you say that's the policy, it's a good way of having a public lynching, isn't it? So we actually need to articulate what a fully funded transition would look like for the fossil fuel workers and those coal-dependent communities that we see. And Chris gave you a map of New South Wales where you could see those coal communities. It's in the Hunter, Newcastle, a bit of the Central Coast, and then you also see down in the Illawarra as well. These are the sort of core coal-dependent communities. There's some further coal-dependent localities in Western New South Wales, but it's Newcastle and the Hunter, it's a bit of the Central Coast, and it's the Illawarra. They're the core communities we're talking about. So, magically, this is the wrong way around. This is the question, and this is the answer. How do you make the transition work? Well, one of the key ways we believe it should work is by establishing a coal community and environmental trust. We need to put in place an authority. We call it a trust, you can call it whatever you like. We need a statutory authority that's going to manage, starting now, manage the transition. The proposal that we've put forward is that we create the trust and we seed it with at least $1 billion. There's probably more of that in the Coal Community and Environmental Trust, which is funded by a guaranteed 20% of all of the state coal royalties that will be produced between now and 2030. And you can do the numbers a variety of different ways. On one view, 20% of the coal royalties would be valued at about $1.8 or $2 billion. We put it in at $1 billion because we actually want to be transitioning out of coal over the course of the next 10 years. So we say a conservative estimate of how much that would produce is $1 billion. There's a reason we want to target coal royalties for this transition fund. It's because it seems to us fundamentally equitable that the wealth that is produced by the coal communities, wealth that is otherwise going into the coffers generally of the state of New South Wales, the wealth that's been produced by those coal communities should be the source of the funding to transition them away from fossil fuel. There's an inherent justice in tying coal royalties into the transition fund. So, Chris is right. You can't just do this in 6 months. You saw what happened with Hazelwood. It's a disaster. We need a 10-year transition plan that's going to be supporting people working in the fossil fuel industries. We know some of them are already in decline, and it's going to have to support the transition to renewables. The good news is that when you do launch this kind of policy, it actually gets buy-in in places like the Hunter. That's the front page of the Newcastle Herald when we announced this policy in the course of the state election. Now, once we announced it, we then saw some additional buy-in of a kind of version of this by a couple of independent MPs, and good on them for buying into the kind of project that we put. But we also saw a moment of kind of hope and positivity in both the public discussion and the media in Newcastle and the Hunter, and then when we launched it again in the Illawarra a few days later, really positive feedback in the Illawarra a few days later, because those communities aren't fools. They know this big change is coming. They can tell that the $150,000 job operating a machine in an open cut coal mine or running one of those longwall coal mining operations under the escarpment in the Illawarra, they know those jobs and the wealth that's been produced in the moment is really fragile, and they can feel it. Many people, just keep their head down and try and act in denial, but the communities know a substantial change is coming, and they're frightened and they're scared and they're looking to politics for long-term answers and not just slogans, and that's why we believe the Coal Community Trust Fund is the answer. So what would you produce with between $1 and $1.8 billion? Well, you'd start with direct investment in regional TAFE campuses in Newcastle, the Hunter Valley and the Illawarra. And you'd have a focus on training up for the transition. Now that'd be a focus on fee-free green technology, environmental restoration courses. When you shut down coal mines, there's a lot of work to be done. And it should be high quality, well-paid work to fix up the devastation caused by coal mines. And if we're going to use the existing transmission technology, that's a good spot to build a bunch of renewable energy projects as well. So there's some actual benefits in doing that. We should also be looking at a rewilding program to deliver large-scale reforestation, particularly in the Hunter, to restore some of the direct environmental damage caused by more than a century of coal mining. Real, practical, identifiable jobs and investment. And it should come with a commitment to new public jobs in education, new public jobs in renewable energy, and long-term sustainable jobs. And we should also have a chunk of the money set aside as an incentive fund to create new regional industries in those areas, or expand on things like the horticulture and grape industry or the tourism industry. These are the kinds of things you do if you plan early, you commit the funds, and you work with the communities to transition. So that's what should be happening, right? That's what should be happening. We should be having large-scale public investment, public planning, 10-year transition plans, identifiable source of funding, working with the communities now. But what's actually happening instead is, well, I heard the phrase politics from the side here. Yeah, well, I think politics is creating barriers to most of the solutions. What's happening at the moment is a series of unplanned actions. We're seeing a transition, particularly in the coal industry, from steady permanent union jobs into labour hire. And we're actually seeing some of those wage results degrading substantially as those corporate, as coal companies are looking forward and seeing their profits being squeezed, they're squeezing the workforce in turn. At the moment, there's a slight bump in coal prices. That won't last. As coal prices slide, as they inevitably will, we're going to see the money being paid to coal miners substantially being reduced. And we're already seeing that transition in the Hunter. The proportion of the Hunter coal community, coal miners that are on permanent long-term union jobs, is declining year on year on year. And in fact, in many coal pits, you find there's a minority of workers who are actually directly employed by the mine, and they're kind of like the industrial elite. And they will be working right next to a majority of workers who are on labour hire doing exactly the same work, being paid half to two-thirds what they're being paid as it's happening. And obviously it's in the mine's interest to transition away from permanent workforce to that insecure labour hire. But we're also seeing across the country some pretty large investment in large-scale private renewables. And I've recently come back from a trip to South Australia, which has been probably the most successful in promoting and delivering large-scale renewable energy projects. We see some very large projects that have been built already, and it's in this sort of arc. If people are familiar with South Australia's geography, you've got the Spencer Gulf, you've got Adelaide on one side, and on the other side you've got Whyalla, and then right at the top of the Gulf you've got Port Augusta. And that big arc, all the way from Whyalla to Port Augusta and then reaching across to the New South Wales border, that's a great big arc where there's substantial investment in large-scale solar and large-scale wind. And they kind of work nicely together because solar starts producing early in the day when the sun comes on, gets a nice early production, and then sort of peters out towards the afternoon. And as the afternoon kicks in, the differential between the land and the sea temperatures produces a nice set of winds that come in and get the wind energy running through the evening peak. It's a kind of nice mix down there. And then as you go further across into inland South Australia and across into New South Wales, there are billions and billions of dollars of approved investment in large-scale solar investment in that arc. But there's no plan. And indeed, if you go and talk to the unions, and even if you talk to some of the proponents of these large-scale renewable energy projects, they fully admit that these are non-unionised work sites. Most of the construction is being done by workers on ABNs. There's no plan for an ongoing union agreement. And the other thing you'll see if you go there is almost no engagement with traditional owners and First Nations peoples. The land on which this wealth is being produced, this new wealth is being produced, they are completely cut out of the deal. In fact, there's one project that has just been announced where it's the first time we've seen a genuine engagement with First Nations peoples and an Indigenous employment program attached to it, but by and large, First Nations peoples are being cut out of this. But one of the other things we're seeing is through the lack of planning, and Chris was giving you some of the technical reasons why, we're not seeing the detail, the investment in the infrastructure needed to attach these large-scale renewable energy projects to the markets where the energy is going to be consumed. And that's really Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane. One of the projects that gives me some hope, which I think has been approved by AEMO, at least gone through the first stage of approval, is this interconnector that's going to link up this big chunk of solar assets that we see here from South Australia and into the Hay Plains in New South Wales, link it up with the rest of the energy network on the East Coast. That interconnector will hopefully be built in the next couple of years, and that's going to make for another surge of investment in South Australia and a big surge of investment across the Hay Plains, leading down into the Riverina in New South Wales. But unless we build not only that interconnector, but we need another interconnector connecting Snowy Hydro 2.0, and we need another interconnector coming down from Queensland to actually genuinely create a national renewable energy market. Unless we see this kind of large-scale public investment and planning, we're going to continue to see a very piecemeal, ad hoc, unsatisfactory investment in renewable energy. We're going to continue to see generators gaming the system to hold on to their ageing assets as long as possible to gouge out profits. And we're going to continue to let down those coal-dependent communities where most of the current generators and the coal is being produced. In short, we need a political commitment to a long-term plan to not only save the coal community's future, but also build the renewable energy network that we need going into the future. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, David and Chris. Please give one more round of applause to both the presenters.